Debbie, yeah.
Very long time. And we're delighted that he's come today to talk about his work in the international field. So over to you, Phil. I'm going to turn my my screen off. Admit all, we've got more people coming in all the time.
Good. Okay. All right. I'll get going.
You can get going.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening from Indonesia, and good evening if you're going to be viewing this on the recording. Apologies for the time zone switch. It often happens, I'm afraid, so don't worry. Yeah, so I'm Phil Rogers. I've been a SIAM member for quite a few years now, since 2008, and I've been working in the field of ecology and international ecology. So this is a little bit of a storyline since 2006, and a look at some of the places I've been to and some of the work I've done over that period. So let's get going. So I'm just going to say a little bit about me, and then I will introduce international biodiversity consultants to you, and then we'll go on a world tour and have a look at some of the work I've been doing and some of the work that I've been involved with. And then I'm just going to dwell on a few slides with some of the aspects of international work. If you're interested in that, I appreciate that some people might be new to international work and might be interested and curious about it, and others might know a bit about it, and I'm sure there's others that know lots about it. So we just dwell on that, and then I'm just going to talk about IBC's current focus and what we're looking at now. So just a little bit about me. Originally, I'm an environmental scientist. I did my first degree in environmental science and then went on to do an ecology degree focusing on estuarine and marine studies. And I fell in, straight after my PhD, I fell into environmental consultancy quite quickly. And I joined a company called AMEC, which is no longer, unfortunately now, but was a company that existed in the UK since the 19th century. So it did a good run, but fell over in about 2017, 2018, I think it was. And I started as an ecologist, primarily focused on UK work, and but then started to get involved with a lot of international work through the business unit I was working with, which was an international mining group. But 2008, the financial crisis hit, and markets around the world were disrupted, and that had a knock-on effect at the time with mining. And mining went very, very quiet internationally. And I decided to go back to the UK and focus on UK work. And I moved to Jacobs in 2015 and was working on lots of their projects based in Croydon. We built up the Croydon office there, and I've fond memories of some of the work we did there. And then at the back end of Jacobs, I was yearning to go back to international work, and I moved over to Ramble for a brief period of time before establishing International Biodiversity Consultants in 2019. And then just before COVID hit, I was given an opportunity to move to Indonesia to work for an Australian consultancy business. And they were looking for someone with marine ecology experience and mining experience. And they had scoured the world trying to find someone and couldn't find anyone at all. Surprisingly, they couldn't find anyone in Australia. But they managed to find my CV via a recruitment agent in London. And we thought, I think it was a fantastic opportunity. It was exciting, a place I hadn't been to before, and a part of the world I hadn't worked in. And we did it, and just so thankful we did, because COVID hit weeks later, and of course, you know, the world changed, and it was a very different place. So let's have a look at IBC, International Biodiversity Consultants Limited, and yeah, so I set the business up in 2019. It's an independent ecological and environmental consultancy. And we've been developing our services and focusing on a range of of services that we provide to our clients. It of course includes ecology and traditional surveys. We've been doing a lot of that work, remote sensing, GIS analysis, and we're using a lot of innovative eDNA sampling and particularly metabarcoding analysis as well for big scale studies. And we're getting more into sort of corporate policies and strategies, and sort of developing action plans for companies, monitoring and evaluation programs. And we've also been doing due diligence work as well. And of course, sort of with more recent initiatives such as TFND, Task Force for Nature Disclosure, the EU corporate sustainability reporting directive, we've been moving more into materiality and stakeholder engagement and business processes such as value chains. And yeah, and especially so in sort of Europe and the UK, that there's a lot of that work coming through at the moment. Now, just a quick call out on our team. So we've got people all around the world that work for us, and we have a sort of a base of associate consultants that we work closely with, and we have a CV bank of about 100 at the moment, which we can call on to provide a whole range of sort of technical services that we might need, depending on the client and the contract going at the moment. Currently, we're working with Paki from India, Mumbai, India, and she's project managing our biggest project to date, working with an investment firm with over 1 trillion investments globally. They want to know what their impacts are on biodiversity hotspots, and we're looking all around the world with a team working on that project, siphoning through thousands of companies, seeing where their impact is. We work with Natalie, who's based over in Germany, and she's an international bat expert, and Chiara from Switzerland. She does some of our data analytics, and Annie also works in sort of the spatial statistical field and supports us here. And a big shout out to Tanya. She's designed this slide deck today and helps with a lot of our project work. So where have we worked? Well, this map's a little bit out of date now, actually. So we can probably say that we've sort of worked and studied most countries in the world, but this is sort of more my historical presence in many places. Many of these places I've been to and visited, and have done a lot of work in West Africa and Africa generally, and Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and now currently based here out in Southeast Asia. Okay, so if you're having your lunch, you can sort of sit back and watch the postcard display come up. I will talk about some of these places that I've been to. Or if you're watching later, you can sit back and drink your cup of tea as I introduce you to some of the work I've done. And let's start with Spain. Spain is obviously a place that many people will know and have visited on their holidays. And this was actually a part of Spain that I hadn't been to before. It is Toro, up in the Galicia region in northwest Spain, sometimes called Green Spain. And I was there to assess a copper mine project. And we were doing a preliminary economic assessment, PEA, but a different one this time. And I was actually there as part of as an environmental consultant and ecologist to give the angle on the environment and biodiversity and ecology for this project. And you can see in the main photo here that the habitats are quite varied. You can see sort of agricultural land here, and you can actually see signs of the mine in the upper left-hand corner of the photo. That's a waste dump just here, and there's some other waste dumps here. And some of this had actually been restored and rehabilitated, which is great. And also where I'm standing here, just up on this hilltop, you can just see gorse in front of me here. This is actually sort of very natural habitat. So, and that introduces a main theme for my talk. And anyone who knows about international work will be familiar about the types of habitat characterization that we use. So for habitat that includes agriculture, forestry, mining areas, we call that modified habitat. And for areas that are less disturbed or even not disturbed at all, we call that natural habitat. And then just to the right hand side here, you can see here's a river here, river corridor here. This is the Rio Ula actual Natura 2000 site, special area of conservation. And this is obviously critical habitat. So three types of habitat that we use a lot in international work to characterize project sites. And critical habitat being the most important, and that obviously supports endangered species, threatened species, endemic species, migratory species, and other sort of important parameters. So this is a good example because I'm going to mention that quite a few times during these slides. Well, okay, let's go a little bit further afield now, further south, and this is West Africa, and a lovely tropical place, as you can see. But we were here to do a lot of hard work, and this was actually a iron ore project. So Liberia was just coming out of a civil war in the early 2000s, a 20-year horrendous civil war, really nasty. But the country was starting to return to the international fold, and a lot of the big international mining companies were very interested in Liberia. And in fact, we were working on a project very close to the coastline. It was a mound of iron ore tailings, a huge mound of iron ore tailings, millions of tons of iron ore. And the Swedish company that had been working on it 20 years prior to that, in the 1980s, it had just fled the country and left all its assets there, and subsequently went bust. And another company had come in and purchased that resource, and they were wanting to build a new port extension just up on the horizon here. And we were here to look at some of the coastal biodiversity and ecology habitats. And just starting here on the main picture here on the right, we were working with University of Exeter to do a marine turtle study, and we managed to record all of the main species present: hawksbill, olive ridley, leatherback, and green. Some of these critically endangered and endangered species were all found. We found sort of various marks and tracks on the beach, and we did a sort of daily survey to record presence. And then we went out with another university to cover some of the other aquatic features. And here on the left-hand side at the top, you can see this was a brackish river and mangrove habitat that we did and studied. And you can see the waters are very dark here. We think that was because probably a lot of pollution had been washed into the river. And then just here, a much rarer West African habitat, a beach lagoon, which also studied, and found a few interesting things in there too. And well, that work in Liberia increased and became much more sensitive and controversial as well. And we found ourselves working on a project. This time, an Australian mining company had purchased a resource called the Putu Ranges. It was an iron ore project, probably had about 4 billion tons of iron ore present. And they were in exploratory mode, and they were running over the site and coming to this site and visiting and being there as an ecologist to study the site. It was very shocking to see that they were moving in very quickly with bulldozers here and leveling the site. In fact, ecology work had already happened over the previous 2 years, and a baseline had been actually captured. And this is probably one of the most sensitive sites I've worked on. Many IUCN red-listed threatened species were present across the whole range of groups, from flora, invertebrates, newly identified species, previously not described to science before. And of course, many endemic species were located in this area. And in fact, ecologists described it as this lost world that no one had previously discovered before. And it was a great privilege to work with some fantastic ecologists on this place and understand what they had discovered. And we went on to actually do some further work to support the critical habitat assessment. And critical habitat assessment is like an ecological impact assessment, but much more in depth, looking at threatened species. So this is just here on the map here. This is the Putu iron ore mining concession here, and you can just see two parallel lines here. And these are the Putu ranges, these hills that contain the iron ore resource. And you can see how close it is to one of Liberia's most important national parks, and first national park, in fact, that was set up, Sapo National Park. And of course, you know, there were ecological corridors and connective pathways to the Putu ranges. So hence, this is why it was a very important area for biodiversity. But I'm pleased to hear that only just a few weeks ago, I was talking to a forestry expert that has done a lot of work in Liberia, and he reported to me that actually this has received some form of protection. So I need to do my due diligence and go and have a look and find if that is the case. And that is very welcome news if that is so. And I hope it's going to be protected for many years to come. So just jumping over from Liberia now over to Sierra Leone, that was also sucked into this regional civil war with Liberia. It was a resource war over mining and gold and diamonds. And here we were working for a United Kingdom gold mining company in Bauman in central Sierra Leone. And here I am with Quinton Luke, a famous African botanist, and we were there to support some of the African studies that have been done because they had identified botany as being quite important. And in fact, we went on to record about 389 plant species, 62 of which were listed on the IUCN Red List. But you can see that the landscape here has dramatically been changed, and even up here on the left-hand side, top left-hand photo here, you can see that, in fact, even the hills that had been spared disturbance had now there's so much pressure on the land that people are moving up the hillsides and utilizing this land, which means that some of the sort of lesser disturbed forest areas on these hills was starting to become cleared, and rotational agriculture was moving in, which was very sad. But of course, you know, people need to eat and people need to grow crops, sell crops, and obviously that's a very important aspect. And we actually got to go into these hills where Kangari Hills Forest Reserve was located. Previously, no studies that we had found had been had occurred there since the 1930s. So Quinton was very excited about surveying in the park and trying to find some new species. He did take away a few plant samples. I never heard back from him whether these were new species, but it was an exciting survey nonetheless. So that was West Africa, very much green. Now let's jump over to East Africa, which is very much yellow and very dry and arid. And this was Sudan, and I only ended up going to Sudan because no one in my team actually wanted to go, and I thought this was such an exciting place to go, and I went there as an environmental consultant. There wasn't much ecology work to be done here, but nonetheless, I was always fascinated in desert ecology, and it was an exciting place for me to go. And in the background, this photograph, you can see the Red Sea Hills, and this was again another gold mine that we were investigating. It was an operational gold mine, so there were sort of mining activities present, and I was there to sort of look at the environmental state and report back, and that was reporting for lending purposes. So many of these mining companies are always on the search for financial resources to support their work before they start yielding some of the rewards from digging up the gold and selling it on the markets. They had to be supported by banks lending them money, and one of the issues with sort of desert work and desert activities is that the disturbance can be a lot more significant, because you can see that that the habitats around are not sort of identified clearly. So this allows vehicles and disturbance to be widely to spread widely and disturb a lot of these very sensitive habitats. And it only takes a vehicle to move over some of these places and disturb the plants and the sand, and then they can be degraded very quickly. Okay, so from Sudan in East Africa, let's jump over to the Middle East. And Bahrain is a place I got to know very well. I had to go there to work on a critical habitat assessment, and this was for an oil and gas company. There's an oil and gas company in Bahrain that receives a lot of the oil from Saudi Arabia, and then they move it onto the coastline, and it gets loaded onto ships and off to sort of markets around the world. And they were building a bridge over this tidal channel here. This is called the Mamir Channel, and it links up with one of Bahrain's most famous national park areas, a protected area, and a Ramsar site, and that is Tubali Bay. And Tubali Bay is very famous for migratory birds traveling between Africa, through the Middle East, up into Russia and Central Asia. Very important stopping off place, and very reliant on sort of tidal flows of water that come through this channel here. However, this channel is actually silting up and will one day eventually dry up, because up, and you can just see up ahead of the channel here that they've already started building bridges over, and this disturbs the hydrodynamics, and the sediment settles out downstream, and it starts to sort of fill up with sand and fine silts. But we were here to actually map some of the mangrove habitat. This is a mangrove plant here, Avencia marina, and it's actually a dwarf species. They can actually grow a lot larger than this, but because the sort of the high tidal mark of the channel is decreasing, they're getting less and less exposed to sources of fresh water and saline water, brackish water, and hence their condition here. But nonetheless, mangrove is a very prestigious plant in Bahrain. It's heavily protected, and the Bahrainians do not like to see it disturbed or removed. So hence we had to do a very detailed study here looking at this plant and this particular habitat. Okay, so from Middle East, we're going to jump back to Eastern Europe now, and this is Romania. Again, this is gold mine work. I worked for a couple of projects. This is the Ravina gold mine project, and another one I worked on was Russia Montana project. And these were much more controversial here. So people were much more aware of the environment and the damage that mining companies can do to the environment, and they're much more vocal. And in the case of Russia Montana project, that was actually stopped in its tracks due to disturbance to a lot of the habitat around, which is probably not too dissimilar from what you can see here. And you can see, some of the activities here. This is due to the Romania coming out of the Soviet bloc in the 1980s. Farming practices were not too dissimilar from that in the United Kingdom in the 1940s. Soon after the Second World War. You can see the farmer here just raking his hay from his field into piles, to be dried, and you can see that there's generous amounts of hedgerows and tree lines around, and forestry in the background. But this forestry is deceptive. This was actually planted in the 1930s by the Survey area. These were very large scale commercial forestry, but over time has been allowed to naturalize, and this was actually categorized as natural habitat here. And again, I don't know what happened with Vivina gold mine, whether that proceeded or not, but I suspect that probably Romanians being very vocal, they were probably protesting about this one as well. And also, just to introduce you to another thing we look at a lot is ecosystem services assessments, and you can hear obviously provisional services here. If you were to flip the camera, you would see a lot of beehives, and the area is very rich in wildflowers because of these meadows and traditional farming methods, and a lot of good Romanian honey, organic honey, still comes from this country. And then now moving further east into Central Asia, and this is Kyrgyzstan, and another really fascinating country, just coming out of Soviet era control in the 1990s, and we were looking at working for another United Kingdom gold mining company, and this is a place called Sharat. Just in the sort of shadow of the Himalayas, really, which is why you see these very dramatic mountains here. Very harsh environment, very cold in the winter, lots of snow, and very difficult to actually get to. So we had a very tight travel window between September, October, when we had to travel. And in the summer, it's extremely dry and very hot and arid. And you can see here that this sort of steppe plateau montane grass habitat here, and interspersed and sporadic shrub formation. So, very sensitive hillsides, and you can see here on the left-hand side, some of the roads have been developed for the mine, and soon as these roads were laid, then what we often saw was landslides and disruption to this very sensitive ground. So as soon as that top layer of habitat was removed, degradation soon followed, and deterioration of the landscape occurred. And we actually worked on another project in Kyrgyzstan. This time, right up in the mountains. This is actually Kumtor gold mine. It's the fourth highest operating mine in the world at 16,000 meters. We actually had to have a medical examination before we went up. We had to have pills taken to thin our blood, and again, absolutely fascinating place. And the Kyrgyz government were actually taking this Canadian gold mine company to court. And many people had complained about it. And you can see here on the right-hand side that there's a track. This is the actual access track to the road. And this road was throwing up lots of dust, which was settling on the trees and the sort of grassed areas beside the road. And these sort of grazing areas were very important for farmers and grazing sheep, and also yielded a lot of flowering plants. And many of these were actually nationally important to Kyrgyzstan. So in terms of capacity building, Kyrgyz biologists and ecologists were much more aware and had recording a lot of data in their country, and so were sort of protesting about this. And the Kyrgyz government were taking them to court. So I was sort of being brought in as the ecologist, and we were working on a due diligence project for one of London's leading legal firms, and to do a sort of independent review of this project and determine if there was sort of valid impacts occurring. So we had to meet local people, local scientists and ecologists, and sort of understand from them what was happening locally. And that was a 2-year project that we were working on. Okay, so a little bit more up to date now. So this is where I am at the moment in Southeast Asia, and this is Vietnam, which I visited a couple of years ago. And for mining, I'm now moving into hydropower. So I'm supporting my company, looking at hydropower projects. Again, yeah, big projects that can disturb the environment a lot, and the aquatic environment especially. And this is actually an existing hydropower project that we were working for. We were conducting a hydro peaking study. So when a dam releases its water flow, that can dramatically change the river. The depth of the river increases, the velocity of the water flow increases, and that can obviously have a knock-on impact to aquatic ecology, specifically aquatic macroinvertebrates and fish species. And I was lucky enough to do the biggest eDNA macro study to date, using meta barcoding methods. And we collected samples during COVID time, so I had to rely on a Vietnamese university academic research institute to do a lot of the work. And they went out and did the ecological characterization of the sites. They did a river corridor assessment. They did a traditional ecology study, and they also collected eDNA samples, which we got analysed by Naturemetrics in the UK after a lengthy period of trying to get them out of the country. And we recorded about 150 fish species, which was absolutely phenomenal. So that was the point. Then I realised how powerful eDNA sampling can be, and that data enabled us to characterize aquatic fish communities from right down in Ho Chi Minh City, which is very tidal, much closer to the sea, right up 60 kilometers upstream to where the dam was located. And interestingly, with this project, we were able to detect that even though hydropeaking was occurring, and that would obviously have great disruptive um, uh, um, impacts to the aquatic environment immediately downstream of the dam, we actually found that there were many fish species highly adapted to fast-moving waters, highly oxygenated waters, fish that secure themselves to rocks at times of hydropeaking or hid under the rocks. It was fascinating to see that actually a dam could have a beneficial impact on biodiversity, as well as perhaps a further negative impact further downstream. So yeah, that was a really good project to work on, and then right up to date now, 2024. This is Borneo, or Kalimantan, as the Indonesians call it. This is one of their big rivers, huge river system. These are almost like inland seas. Some of these rivers, they're so wide in places. And we're currently doing a downstream study, so very similar to a hydropeaking study, but looking at the downstream environment. And again, we're doing another bigger eDNA survey with Naturemetrics across 180 kilometers of upstream river, estuarine delta area, and even marine conditions as well. So we're just waiting for the data to come back on our first round, seasonal round, and it's going to be really interesting to see what we find on this river. This is the same river actually, but much further upstream, and you can see how turbid the river conditions are. And this is because you might be thinking this is tropical jungle for miles to see. When we think of Borneo, we think of David Attenborough and sort of the programs that he made. But actually, this habitat is actually protected beside the river and only exists 20 to 40 meters inland. And then after that, all you can see is mile after mile of palm oil plantation. Huge swathes of land have been cleared for agriculture. And Borneo today is not what some of these BBC nature programs predict it to be. When I fly over it, what I'm seeing is a dramatically changed landscape, and a lot of the forest has been lost, and only the sort of the protected areas still exist. So the reason why this river is so sedimented is because the land has changed, the land uses have changed, and that is allowing a lot of silt and sediment to be washed out into the river from upstream, and that's why it is so sediment laden. However, this did prove a challenge for collecting our eDNA samples. These super clay fine particles actually clogged up the DNA filters. But upside is that DNA actually attaches itself to these very super fine particles. So we're hoping that we're going to discover a lot of species. So this is a greenfield hydropower project that is yet to be built. But yeah, this is the dilemma. Does Indonesia rely on its coal-fired power stations, of which it has many, of which it is continuing to build? And of course, it knows it is impacting on climate change. And so it's going through this huge green transition to move from coal to more renewable sources. And unfortunately, it's really tough as an ecologist to accept this argument that do we continue with dirty fossil fuels providing power, or do we move over to more cleaner sources of energy? And then finally, another fascinating country, Papua New Guinea, and I've worked on a couple of projects there, and was there just in late 2023. Again, this is the sort of this is the habitat that you might think: nice mountains, highlands as they call them in Papua New Guinea, covered in forest, famous for the birds of paradise, of course. But down on the plains, this is the reality. A lot of area has been cleared. The lowland hills here, you can see, have been denuded of forest, and again, mile after mile of palm oil plantations now exist. Yeah, it's interesting going on these journeys. They're not going. You're not always going to the prettiest of sites. You're actually getting to see a lot of the country and how the country actually is compared to some of the sort of tourist sites and what the tourists look like. Okay, well, that was the end of the postcard show. So I hope you got some idea of some of the work that I've been involved in around the world. And I thought this is a good opportunity to just provide some aspects on that. So if you're thinking about going into international work, this is where you need to concentrate. So well, just a couple of points that how we sort of do our work and how we develop our work and how we sort of report on our studies. So, similar to the UK, we will do desk-based assessments. We will look at larger areas and then focus down. So look at biomes and ecoregions down to habitats. Protected areas, of course, are very important because of the amount of threatened species they often support, and areas of conservation importance are very important. So areas of conservation importance could be considered candidate nationally protected areas, areas such as key biodiversity areas, important bird areas, endemic bird areas, Alliance for Zero Extinction sites, and Centres for Plant Extinction importance. So these are some of the important areas of conservation importance, and they are developed and built up by a network of international NGOs like WWF, BirdLife International, and Conservation International. And then we draw on a lot of our data from IBAT, which you might be familiar, based in Cambridge, UK, integrated biodiversity assessment tool. And and through that license, we use data from IUCN Red List, essentially looking at threatened species and endemic species, migratory species. And then we will go on, just like in the UK, we'll go on to do field studies, and those studies tend to focus on threatened species, endemic species, protected species, and like I mentioned, with a lot of our studies now, we're using innovative technology such as eDNA. We will then do a detailed baseline reporting, impact assessment. So again, similar to the ecological impact assessment, that's more high level than a UK ECIA, but we would go in depth with a critical habitat assessment, which is a real, very focused study on particularly critically endangered species, endemic species, migratory species. Yeah, through the ESHA, Environmental and Social Impact Assessment, we develop mitigation. And a real big theme of today is the mitigation hierarchy. And we are really we're really pressurizing clients now to use that. It's part of the safeguarding framework that we use. And it's the premise is to avoid impact first, reduce your impacts, restore where necessary, or compensate at offset. I won't get into offsetting. I think offsetting is fairly controversial. I'm not a fan of it, but unfortunately, it's part of the frameworks that we use. We then go on to do management plans, biodiversity management plans, offset management plans, and then biodiversity strategy and action plans. And then, as I mentioned previously, we do a lot of work on ecosystem service assessments with projects impacting on local communities, indigenous peoples, ethnic peoples. This is becoming more and more important as a study, and certainly with people using provisional services, services from forests, medicinal plants, for example, and non-timber forest products, etc. These studies become very important. So what are the main sort of legal and safeguarding frameworks we use? So yeah, international conventions like Convention on Biological Diversity we use, CITES, Ramsar Convention, UNESCO, WH, World Heritage Site Convention, Nagoya Protocol in connection with eDNA and shipping DNA material. But that is becoming more and more difficult to do. And so what some of these eDNA labs do is use local labs to do the first stage of analysis, and then they get the data sent online, and that circumnavigates the Nagoya Protocol. It's something pharmaceutical companies have come up with and is being utilized by eDNA companies. And then some of the newer regulations coming in, mentioned these ones earlier, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and EU Deforestation Reporting Directive as well, very important as well. And nationally, most countries have protected area networks through the CBD Convention, and this is important that we refer to those. And probably more important than national legal frameworks is international safeguarding frameworks. And this is almost certainly a main focus of our work with any project we do. So it will either be World Bank safeguarding standards we work to, International Finance Corporation safeguarding standards, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank. I think there's a bank for South America, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. These are critical. If you want to develop your project and you want to access money on the international global financial markets, you need to be aligning yourself with Equator Principles, and Equator Principles is interconnected into International Finance Corporation safeguarding standards, and these are probably the world's leading standards. They date back to 2012, but some of the guidelines date back to 2019. But they are still seen as the leader in terms of Asian Development Bank will often refer to IFC, African Development Bank will do the same. And then there are sector-specific safeguarding standards. First one, HSA, that's the Hydropower Sustainability Assessment, Hydropower Sustainability Standard. And then there is the IPICA, which is the International Petroleum Industry Environmental Conservation Association. They have their own safeguards and standards. Again, these are also very aligned with IFC. So you can see how important this IFC standard is. And then we have others like the International Council on Mining and Metals as well. And then another one you might be familiar with, it's getting a lot of attention, is the Task Force for Nature Disclosure. And this is a voluntary effort, but is attracting a lot of attention. There is a lot of interest from businesses at the moment to reduce their biodiversity impact and become net positive by 2030. And this is one of the initiatives to support that. Well, you might be curious about client and project management. Is it any different from the UK? Well, yes, there are unique differences. Language is is a real barrier at times. I don't speak any other language other than English. It's helped me essentially with and English is so well spoken around the world. It's never been a problem. It was only a problem when I worked in Russia and some of the former Russian states. Russian is almost like English there, and English is not used as a second language. Knowledge gaps around the world, global north, so that's Europe, United States, Japan. You might think that the developed nations are sort of ahead in terms of capacity, but global south is catching up fast, and some of my ecologists can produce exceptional pieces of work which could stand alone and be validated by any ecologist in the UK. So, the internet, I think, has helped transfer information dramatically to a lot of countries around the world now, and they are catching up fast in terms of what they can do and how they can do it. Just a point on processes, engineering perspectives can be different. So if you're working on a sort of engineering related project, they won't necessarily follow the standards that we are used to as laid down by engineering councils in places like the UK. They will go back and forth. You'll find yourself working to a feasibility standard, and then they will go backwards and redesign the project, and that can be very, very frustrating. But you have to be patient to sort of manage that process. The client is always going to do things like that, and of course, it's a very different process politically as well, working with different countries around the world. So, as I mentioned, frameworks are very important and often more stringent than legal frameworks. Transboundary issues often come up. I mentioned that with Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan often has political issues with its neighbours, and Indonesia, issues with neighbouring Singapore and Malaysia. Many of these transboundary issues are very politically sensitive. Cultural aspects, I'm based here in Indonesia. Indonesia is a very religious place. It's the country with the highest number of Muslims present, and of course that can have a sort of twist to your work, and of course indigenous peoples, and even indigenous peoples issues can also arrive in places like Europe. So I was working on a project in Eastern Europe, and I had ecologists reporting to me mythical beasts that had been recorded. And originally we sort of thought, yeah, this is absolutely crazy, ecologists reporting to us mythical beasts. But thought about it retrospectively, and from an indigenous peoples or ethnic communities perspective, yes, of course, these things are important. So, okay, we have to understand them, but they don't necessarily find their way into scientific discourse and the sort of hard-edged reports that we need to produce. So development frameworks not always the same, and then prices can be different from the global north to the global south. It's much more competitive to do work here. Salary ranges are much lower. To win a project, you've got to be very competitive, and it's very difficult for global north project companies to compete on that level. So just a couple more slides. Professionalism and education, a view from the global south here. Well, many of my staff and many of the ecologists I work with are highly educated. Many of them will go to universities in the UK, Europe, and Australia, America, and as I mentioned, they're bringing in to build that capacity building up. I still think there's a lot of work that can be done in tertiary post-education professional support. I don't see so much of that. I think that's something perhaps the UK could really help on. And professional memberships as well, and professional organisations are something that need a lot of work outside of the global north. These are perhaps could do with more support, and perhaps organisations like SAME can help on that, and especially with career professional development. I think my ecologists really yearn for doing more of that, and often that's me having to provide that to them. So it comes personally delivered to them rather than through trained professionals to do that. And then work cultures very different from Europe and the UK. The people I work around me in Indonesia, extremely hard workers. It's not often that I might come on my laptop late at night and I see them green lighting on Teams, and they will work very, very hard to get jobs done. And you can see here from the compensation that it's insanely low. I don't know how some of my staff um, um, operate on these salaries, but there is people that are not educated that are only earning a few dollars a day. So when you look at a graduate earning £100, £400 a month, that is a lot of money to them. And then you can go through the scale upwards to principal at around 1,500, 2,500. So very challenging to work and very demanding in terms of sort of what you're expected to give. So just a quick dwell on future aspects, concerns and directions. Use of AI, right. So AI is probably being adopted is equally fast as it is in the United Kingdom. I haven't been back to the UK since last year, but I'm pretty sure that AI is sweeping the UK. Some of our staff are using it to build proposals in proposal preparation. It's quite good for that. They're using it with mixed successes in desk-based reporting. I am now very clear, can accurately pick up when someone's used ChatGPT. There's a particular style that ChatGPT gives, and I will call my staff out for doing that, and they will need to go back and adjust the report. But what it is really good for is grammar-related corrective AI. There's a great app called Grammarly, and they are using that very effectively. So we're now getting really well-built reports and well-written reports. And then just in terms of context building, any of the generative AI models are very good, and people are starting to use them in different ways for global research and data scraping. But I do think there are some sort of trends that we need to look out for. And what I do notice is that research skills are being lost. So it's much easier to just go and use AI, Copilot, ChatGPT, get the information you need without going through the proper stages of doing thorough research. And that worries me a lot. I see that being a deteriorating sort of skill that staff will be moving to AI faster than they move to something like Google Scholar, for example. And I think there's some other trends. So while reporting will improve, I think that will push ecologists more to focus on field skills and research skills, perhaps as well, that need to sort of back that field skill and experiences up. And so even though AI will perhaps grab more of our reporting, I think there will be years to come where traditional ecology skills need to be deployed. And even things with eDNA, it's not going to take over. We're seeing pushback from things like organizations like IFC on eDNA. They want to see traditional ecology surveys deployed as well. And then just a point on data access and gatekeeping. There's a lot of this going on, and from a global South perspective, it's really challenging to come across organisations. I'm afraid to say some of these organisations are in the UK, holding data, gatekeeping data. That data you've got to access for quite a lot of money from a global South perspective. That is challenging for many of our clients to do that. But again, I see opportunities for AI to break these barriers down. And I think it'll come a time when generative AI like ChatGPT will just be offering IUCN Red List, IBAT, millions of dollars of money to get access to their data, license that data, and that data will become accessible through those Gen AI models. And that will probably again be a game changer in terms of reporting, but maybe a good thing in terms of global access to that. It's, we're in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. We know that scientifically, and yeah, getting data and reporting and recording on data is critically important. And if we can't do that, then we are facing a challenging time ahead. Well, just a quick few key skills and experiences. Probably many of these come as common sense. So I appreciate you probably need to have a desire to travel and explore the world. Sometimes it can be very challenging. Obviously, you've got to be very flexible, working on the move. Travel plans can be disrupted. It can take a long time to get from A to B, especially if the road network is very poor. Adaptability, cultural differences, health and safety aspects. It was very challenging for me to come out here in Indonesia, which very much has a team-orientated culture and does not really appreciate people being torn one off when they've done something wrong. Yeah, you need to do things very discreetly and differently to win people around and ensure that they are on side. So very different from the UK in that perspective. So you've got to be patient. There are language barriers. It sometimes takes me a long time to describe things and get things, messages across, and that can obviously impact on outputs. And you need to be aware of these aspects and approaches. And then, of course, new experiences always come with traveling, cultures, food, friends and associations, and different perspectives, of course. Okay, final slide. Well, back to IBC. So this is just to give you a shout out on some work we are potentially lining ourselves up for. It's an international development consortium with a UK government project looking at monitoring, evaluation, and learning. A lot of interesting ecology work we know is going to come out of this, using innovative techniques such as wildlife acoustics, and doing a lot of sort of aerial and drone work, LiDAR studies, etc. So if you're on sort of short-term contracts, medium-term contracts, and you're looking for spaces to fill and interested to get involved, please give us a shout. Here's our contact details and social media information. Please give us a like on LinkedIn or follow us on LinkedIn. That's always very, very helpful to us in considering that we're just a startup company and we're still starting to build with and compete with some of the bigger entities. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Hope that was interesting. Debbie, over to you.
Phil, thanks very much. That's absolutely great, but we have just 2 minutes for questions.
Oh dear. Oh,
so
sorry.
Can I? Some of the questions I can answer. We can get. I'm hoping that Annie, can you save the chat?
I can certainly try.
So if everyone who's asked a question could very quickly put their email in the chat, we'll take one step out of the process of getting your questions answered. And we will pass your questions on to Phil.
Yeah.
So just put your email quickly in the chat. And because we do actually have to wrap up at 1 o'clock.
I'll be more than happy
just 1 minute.
Answer, yeah.
Yeah. So Phil, thank you. That was great. That was really interesting. I can think of some things that you've told students before about
yes, I know.
losing all your clothes and your passport on one project, and another project where a mining project tipped a lorry load of cyanide into a lake.
Yes.
These kind of, but I think you gave a very good, a very good account there, and really highlighted, the take-home message is that although we're ecologists and we want to do the best for the environment, there are actually pragmatic issues, aren't there?
Yes.
Particularly when you're dealing with clients, and most of the work that's coming, particularly on these international projects, is really quite environmentally damaging.
Absolutely, yes. More so perhaps than sort of developed markets like the UK.
Yeah.
There's plenty of regulation in place to control that.
Your challenges are greater, and Yeah, we have had talks in this series about, yes, how important it is to support ecologists, because actually it can be quite depressing.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah. Right. Well, I'm really sorry, everyone. It's now 1:01, and we
I
really
haven't got there yet, Debbie. Bear with me. I'm just trying to work out how to save all this. I didn't cross it off yet.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm going to stop